My name is Tim Sweeny. I am a Senior Fellow at the UMKC Midwest Center for Nonprofit Leadership. I'm also a consultant with Praxis Nonprofit Strategies, and I'm going to be the host today. Please forgive me, this is the first time I'm hosting a session for the navigation series, so we're trying to work out a few bugs and kind of get our systems in order, but we're delighted to have you here. It seems we have roughly 70 or so colleagues across the nonprofit sector with us today. We have 3 outstanding panelists, and we have several UMKC staff with us. I want to just talk a little bit before we get started about kind of the background of how we arrived to today. Early in the pandemic, the Midwest Center for Nonprofit Leadership decided that they needed to create a forum for people to interact while we are in this more socially distant environment. So they came up with a navigation series for Tuesday mornings as a way to kind of bridge this intersection of the study of nonprofit leadership, which they're doing at UMKC, and the practice of nonprofit management. And they wanted to create tools and an environment where colleagues could share ideas to help nonprofits do their work better. So that's how we've arrived at this navigation series. And we specifically created 6 sessions between today and December 8th, where we're going to be exploring fundraising, specifically within the nonprofit sector. And we have a great series for you. Mark Culver at UMKC, of course, we'll be sharing those links with you and those registrations if you're interested in joining us. But today we wanted to start with a bigger picture for our series, and that's what does fundraising look like in the nonprofit sector now that we're in this global pandemic? And as we talked about the idea, I thought of 3 people that I thought could share great insights of how they're doing work within their own specific organizations to, 1, bring life to their missions, but also do good fundraising and figure out this crazy, insane environment we're in. So I just very briefly want to introduce those speakers, and then I'll give them a chance to talk in 10-minute increments here in just a few minutes. But I want to introduce Becky Summers at Cristo, Tom Turner at Bishop Sullivan Center, and Damon Daniels at Hoc Group Against Crime. Would the 3 of you just say hello and kind of introduce yourselves and tell us just a little bit about the mission of your organizations? Becky, would you start, please?
Good morning. I'm Rebecca Summers, and I'm the Director of Institutional Advancement at Cristo Rey, Kansas City. I'm a lifelong Kansas Citian and proud to be a part of such a leading edge mission, which I'm sure each of you could say about the work that you're doing. So thanks for having me.
Thanks. Becky, could you just tell us quickly, how much money does your organization raise every year, roughly?
5 million.
5 million. Great, thanks. Tom?
I'm the executive director of Bishop Sullivan Center. We're a social service agency. We summarize our mission in 3 words: food, jobs, and aid. So we operate 2 food pantries, a community kitchen. We help people find jobs, and we provide financial assistance, mainly utilities or rent. This is my 28th year here at Bishop Sullivan Center, and our operating budget's around $2 million.
2 million. Great. Thank you, Tom. Damon, would you introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about your mission?
Good morning. I'm glad to be here. Thanks for the invitation. As Tim said, my name is Damon Daniel. I'm the president of the Ad Hoc Group Against Crime. For some, Ad Hoc Group Against Crime is the emergency room for social services, and for others, we are the trusted bridge between the community and the criminal justice system. Our annual organizational budget is just under $700,000.
Okay. And Damon, you do the primary fundraising there at the organization, correct?
I do.
Okay, great. Good. So here's what we're going to do. We're going to spend most of our time listening to the insights and wisdom of Becky, Tom, and Damon. Yeah, I'm going to do a brief overview just to give context to our discussion, but very quickly I'm going to toggle to our three presenters. At about 8:35, we'll transition to more open Q&A for everyone. So let's begin. As I've done fundraising now for 25 plus years, I've hit a point in this pandemic where I was in such uncharted categories and territory. And as I talked to people, I heard two prominent themes, and I pulled these cartoons to give voice to it. Even seasoned fundraisers were just in this doomsday approach of what is going to happen ahead in 2020. And this is going to be a disaster. We're a mess. And I'm just so nervous and scared for our sector. The other one is represented in this slide, and it was the realm of everything's going to be fine. Let's hold hands, sing kumbaya, and think positive thoughts, and we'll raise some money. Those were kind of the two alarmist approach that I saw in the beginning of this pandemic. Now that we've settled in, I think the smarter and the wiser fundraisers have stepped into a strategy that is dramatically different than what they envisioned in the beginning of 2020, but shies away from these two alarmist approach, that there are good things ahead, and there are very intentional and strategic things we can do beyond just wishing that we raise more money. And I think you'll hear that from our three presenters today. I wanted to share this study that I found from CCS Fundraising. They surveyed about 1,400 nonprofit organizations. You can see the breakdown in my list there, asking them what does fundraising look like for you in 2020. And here's some of the things they found, and I wanted to share them because I just thought they gave voice to probably similar things that you all are experiencing here in the region. This first slide talks about reactions in May versus September. And you can see that, folks, the red line represented nonprofits. 63% of nonprofits in May were reporting a decline in funding in May. In September, that's down to about 50%. Still a bit scary, no doubt, but definitely on the right direction. And you see the black line there representing 14% are seeing increases in their funding, and now in September, about 28% of our organizations are actually raising more money today than they were prior to the pandemic. This slide wouldn't surprise you. As you follow the red bar down, that's decline in funding, you can see which type of organizations have been hit the hardest from the pandemic. Performing arts and culture at the top of the list, again, probably wouldn't surprise most of you. And encouragingly, human and social services has kind of a 50-50 balance here, where 42% saw some decline in funding, 45, actually more, are seeing an increase in funding, and 30% remain the same. The next slide illustrates where that money is coming from. Again, probably doesn't surprise you, on the far right-hand side, our special events have seen some of the biggest hits in funding, whereas our foundations have been a stable source of funding. Right there in the middle, the green section, they're funding at the same level. Membership, just faithful, lovely members sustaining our organizations. And then direct marketing, direct appeals have also been fairly stable. Another great shift that is probably intuitive to all of us now is people doing online fundraising events. In June, there was 31%. Now we're almost up to 50% of our organizations doing online fundraising. It's quite a dramatic shift. And the same is true in this set of slides here, this particular slide. It's asking, who's doing some type of major gift solicitation through a virtual means? Those are huge increases, something Tom Turner or Becky or Damon would never have imagined, doing a major gift solicitation through a Zoom call. I mean, it's just so antithetical to what I've always been trained as a fundraiser. We want high touch, high visibility, high contact with our donors. But here we are today with 66% of higher education organizations reporting they're doing major gift solicitations virtually. It's an amazing transition. So this brings me to the heart of our session today. What I asked our folks to talk about, Becky, Damon, and Tom, is just what are they doing in their fundraising shops to raise money for their missions? And I started with this basic fundraising cycle that so many of us were trained in. Identify your prospects, cultivate and involve those prospects, ask for support, and then thank them and thank them again. So my question to them was, is this still relevant? Are we still doing the same basic fundraising? Or what does it look like in the global pandemic? What lessons have you all learned? What exceeded expectations? What didn't go so well? So those were the things that I presented to our speakers. I'm going to ask Tom Turner to start us off with sharing his insights and reflections. And then we'll go to Becky and then to Damon. Tom, are you ready to take it over?
Sure. Morning again. When I talked to Tim yesterday, he did send out to myself, Becky, and Damon a half page of topics and questions he wanted us to cover. And I told him I was going to be like a vice presidential candidate, totally ignore the questions he asked and just speak generally to this issue. So here are just some thoughts I have, and since March, of maybe some being more conscious about the kind of fundraising I do. One thing I've become more aware of in my communication with our donors is the tone that I'm using. So in mid-March, I think all of us, not just people in the fundraising world, everyone, there was somewhat of a panic going on. None of us knew what to expect. It was so hard in those first few weeks. So I remember sending out an email to our donors that kind of reflected that panic and urgency, and probably had a touch of the sky is falling, because that was, I think, what we were all feeling at the time. And people responded very generously to that email. Since then, I think we have all kind of calmed down a little bit. So I don't use that sky is falling tone anymore. It's more measured. I also heard an expression on the news the other night called, they referred to the general experience of COVID fatigue. We're all just getting tired of wearing masks, tired of the social distancing. And I think there have to be around fundraising. I think you still have to articulate what the effect of COVID is, but again, be careful of the tone, that it's not always high-pitched and panicky. Along with that, I've tried to, in terms of my content, reflect what I see currently going on. So I remember when we had the shutdown in mid-March, I had just like 2 days before got back from our printer a newsletter we were planning to send out in a few days. I had to throw that newsletter away. It was totally off message of what was going on in the community and in the lives of our donor. I mean, I felt I put a lot of work into that newsletter, literally had to throw it in the trash. And so I think it's important to reflect the reality of what's going on. And in my line of work, this was kind of interesting. In most of the summer, demand on our services were actually down. You would have thought food pantry would be long lines, a lot of people needing help with financial assistance. Wasn't happening. And our analysis was that there was just so much government money going out, especially the unemployment checks. So I shared that with our donors, and I said, I think it's still coming. Well, now it has hit us. And so now I can share that with the donors. But I think just being honest with what your reality is and not to embellish. Tim had showed one of the charts around doing more online fundraising, and we had our annual auction scheduled for the last Saturday of March, and of course we had to cancel that. We switched to an online auction, which brought in a lot less money. Typically at our auction, the items that bring in the most money, now you could not get or couldn't use. So we had tickets to the Royals game. You know, we had tickets to Chiefs. We had tickets to concerts. We had trips. We had cruises. You know, no one was going to buy any of those items. So we took a hit on the auction. We canceled our golf tournament this fall. I anticipate next March it'll be online again. I've lowered my expectations on what that will be. On that note, I think the thing to be careful about, I think it's tempting in our line of work that to communicate to our donors, say, hey, we can't do the auction, and so the organization will not make as much money. I think it's nuanced, but I don't think donors give some to an organization. They want to give to the mission and to people. So I might phrase that differently and say, because we anticipate our auction bringing in less money, we won't be able to help as many people as we had before. So I think keep the focus on the recipient of their donation and not us who are looking at budget sheets and spreadsheets and saying, oh my God, we're going to fall short. Donors aren't interested in your organization's budget so much as just they want to help people. Another thing is I'm trying to tap into what might be a shared experience between the people we're helping and donors in the pandemic. So I can remember back in 2002, when we had this tremendous ice storm in Kansas City, and thousands were without electricity for a week or 2 weeks. Some of you may have remembered that, but I think it was the largest ice storm in Kansas City and the most people without electricity. Coming out of that, when I wrote a letter to donors saying we're getting a lot of people, having trouble paying their electric bill lest they get cut off. Now, some of them wrote in checks and kind of put messages to the effect of, yeah, I get it now, because they went through an experience without electricity. So I was trying to reflect on what's the common shared experience. And one thing that's a shared experience is we're seeing loved ones less face to face. There's a diminishment there on our part, maybe even an insight into loneliness. So I tapped into that, shared a story with a homeless man I had visited with, who even pre-COVID talked about the loneliness that comes with homelessness. So in that way, I was just trying to connect the donor's experience in a little way with some of our clients where the pandemic maybe has created that kind of sympathy. Another shared experience I'm trying to tap into, because all the fervor going around the Chiefs right now, is it came up with a campaign I'm calling Cover the Bill. And I'm asking people to make a donation to us to help one of our clients cover their bill, because we're getting swamped with requests for that. And that if they send at least $100, we'll send them a Chiefs cap, ask them to put their hand, cover the bill, take a picture of it, put it on their social media, and encourage other people to cover the bill. So I'm trying to tap into the fervor around the Chiefs, shared experience, and parlay that into what's going on in people's lives. So with that, I'll stop, Tim. Those are just a few of my thoughts.
Thanks, Tom. And I just want to take a minute to brag on Tom and his organization, and for you all to just digest some of these insights. Tom's organization relies on individual giving to fund their organization up to, what is it now, Tom? It's plus 90%, isn't it?
90% is individual givers here.
It's just phenomenal, and a real outlier within our organization. And a lot of that has to do with Tom's terrific fundraising and the work they do at the organization. So on that note, Tom, thanks. Jot down your questions in the chat if you want to, or jot them down on your note if you'd like to give voice to them. And we'll circle back to Tom when we're done hearing from Rebecca at Cristo Rey. Becky, I'm going to try to pull up your slides now. Let's see if I can.
Thank you, Tim.
Yep.
I titled this little segment, Never Waste a Perfectly Good Crisis. And the reason I did that is because each of you, when I scanned the list of participants, I saw such community strengthening missions represented. People who served vulnerable people, the elderly, children, people who take up the cause of the cure for people who are ill, people who advance human and social rights of others. Your missions matter. So what I am going to tell you is, in this time, don't waste a perfectly good pause button where people are very, very accessible to you, to hear your case for support, and to support your mission. Now, Cristo Rey, Kansas City straddles a lot of different elements of mission. At the highest level, we're a private college and career prep high school. Okay, there's a lot of those in this space. The thing that makes our mission different is we intentionally serve students who live on the margins of society. The way we do this, and let me just give you a caution light right here, we receive no government funding. So we're not a charter, we're not a public school, we're a private school. The way we do this is, and the people who set upon this mission back in Chicago in 1996, it's such a crazy idea, it shouldn't work. Every student at Cristo Rey receives assistance, but every student also works. So they're working to learn, and they raise approximately half the cost of their own education. So let's go back to March of 2020. When we go back to March, we realize that schools closed and pivoted to distance learning. We all took our offices home, but how do you take a work-study student home with you? So things dramatically shifted for us. Everyone in this call is old enough to remember, though, how we felt in that time period around 9/11, how we felt about Hurricane Katrina and Rita, and then that great uncertainty that we call the Great Recession in 07 and 08. Those were all watershed moments where people took a big, deep breath and paused, and they look for, who are the first responders? Who are stabilizing society? Who are carrying the banner forward? And that's all of us in this call. So even though you are not, as Tom Turner is, in direct human and social services, what you do matters to the life and the fabric of this community. So don't stop, don't pause. It is uncertain times, but we will recover. Now let's take a quick look at how people react, whether it's 9/11, and they immediately opened up their checkbook and gave money to Red Crosses in Shanksville and Red Crosses in the northeast part of our country in DC. There's an immediate bump, and you experienced that too. You got some unexpected gifts from people who said, wow, I wonder how those students and their families at Cristo Rey are doing. People who are very connected to your mission will give. That lasts a pretty short period of time. Then you go into that in these uncertain times mode, and Tom referenced that, of being a little deer in the headlights, a little, where do we go from here? And I can't tell you that the 4 to 8 months that other experts are saying is accurate, but I can tell you that there is a definite slump in giving after the initial, I want to respond, I want to do something to help stabilize. When you move out of that, there's going to be a surge in giving, but I'm going to tell you, don't go looking for that next new donor that you can kindle on a Zoom call or kindle in their driveway or on a patio. It's probably going to be, again, your closely held mission supporters, people who are connected to board members, people who are connected to the founders of your organization. And it's going to be your more significant donors that are going to help with the recovery. When I say the last phase is a new normal, I don't really know what that is going to be. But if you look back at 9/11, Hurricane Katrina, and the Great Recession, giving tilted up afterwards. The people who recover well are the people who worked through all 4 phases. And I will tell you, be mindful of your messaging, but there is a need for speed. You need to be on the phone constantly in each of these phases, updating your significant partners. You need to tell them what you're seeing on the ground. We learned very quickly in the bump that 1/3 of our parents were unemployed, rapidly unemployed. We learned that 1/3 of our households had no one working. Another 10% of our students' parents had significantly reduced hours. I had one woman tell me, I am managing, they call me in when there are flash orders to fill. And I said, Maria, how many hours is that? And she said, I'm getting about 8 hours a week. So the people you intended to serve are being affected. If you can leverage the truth about the people you're serving to the other side of the equation, the people who believe in your mission, they will respond. Tim, could you advance the next slide? Okay, so we've been calling this the moment we're steering through a storm. All of the experts, and they were all over the parking lot. Some said there'll be a 50% decrease in giving. Some people said a 10%. We didn't have, much like Tom, we didn't have any preordained mindset. We just knew that our business partners, who cover roughly half of the cost of our students' education, most likely would not be en masse reopening their workplace. So that became another story to tell. The story we're telling now is half of our students came to Cristo Rey for college and career prep, and half of them have no job placement to go to. Don't stop. Do not stop telling what you see day to day to the people who care about your mission. Much like Tom, we scrapped and hijacked all of our communications. We wanted to speak in terms of student and family-centered impact. We wanted people to understand that we took up the banner to serve people living on the edges of society, and they were some of the most dramatically affected. When we say update your donors, and Tim has asked us to speak to the cycle, I would tell you that in that cycle of engage, ask, pause for a minute, and think about receiving the gift and updating them. You're going to be doing a lot of updating, and it's going to be what you're seeing right now. When the students came back to a hybrid learning model, we had a new message, and we began by saying, well, this is our plan today. We're working with the health department. We're working with advisors. Our plan today is to have the students come back 1 day a week so they can form those relationships with their teachers, but they will be in hybrid distance learning classes on the other days. The students whose jobs have reopened are going to work. Those who are not, we pivoted and put them in job skills lab and business literacy courses. All of your supporters want to know not only what did you do with that gift and how are you making it? How are you steering through that storm? Much like Tom, our annual event was set for the last Saturday in March, and we tried not to blink. So when we vacated that date, we very foolishly accepted a date of August 16th. And it was the hotel who told us the first week of June, this is not going to happen. Well, we already knew that. And then it was now what? So we pivoted to tightening it up and doing it almost like a 1 hour virtually released television show. We didn't raise as much as we raised the year before. The year before, some extraordinary things happened and we topped $1 million in our event. We came in this year at about $930 to $950. We're still receiving some gifts. And we have boldly said, we have a date for next April. And whether we take this fork in the road or the other fork in the road, we're having an event and we're going to aim high and try to capture that community support that we so desperately need and the opportunity to tell our story. So when you reformat things, think about putting your service population in the very center of it. They can't afford for us to stop. Tim, could we go forward a little more? The other thing that I wanted to say is make gratitude and being agile a top priority in your work. Be kind to yourself. Understand that every human being on this planet has been affected by the pandemic. But around you are people who care about the mission and the work that you do and the way you strengthen the community. And what you're looking for are willing partners to help you sustain and take the next step. And I'll let Damon give the rest of the story.
Hey, thanks, Becky. That was great. Just a very quick moment to brag on Becky. As I was planning this with the Midwest Center on Nonprofit Leadership, I ran into Becky and I said, Becky, how are things going? And she told this story of having freezers full of food for their lunch program and talking to their students and the families of those students, saying how marginalized they were and how hungry some were and how scared some were because of the financial impact. And so Becky described this. What I am doing is I am distributing food that we had stored for our lunch program to the families that we serve. And I'm just telling donors about that. So all of a sudden, Becky she went from the VP of advancement at Cristo Rey to the social worker at Cristo Rey and parlayed that into what I consider great fundraising. It was just an inspiring story. And right then I said, Becky, you need to sit on this panel that I'm putting together for the UMKC. So thanks, Becky. Damon, could you take us over now for a little bit?
Sure, thank you. I was sitting here, I was thinking, how vulnerable am I going to be in this discussion? Tim knows me well, and I do my best to just try to keep it, as some of us say, 100, or really real with folks. And so let me just share let me give a little bit of context as I go into talking about 2020. So when I came to Ad Hoc in 2015, I had inherited really an organization that many of you know had been around since 1977 and founded by, I would say, a big civic leader, Mr. Alvin Brooks. And prior, though, to me coming, Ad Hoc, the 3 years prior to me coming, had a new director each year. In 1 year, we had a director that was there 11 months and a director that was there almost 12 months. And then we had a part-time executive director as well. And so when I came to Ad Hoc, the budget was just under 200,000. And we had 2 full-time staff, myself included, and our founder, and who was actually part-time at the time, really kind of almost on a volunteer basis. And then we have 4 contract staff and about a dozen core volunteers. So the biggest challenge for me when I stepped into Ad Hoc was really beginning to sort of transition from our founder to me, which was a very, I would say, a heavy task. But it really took, and I was looking at Tim's questions and that the way in which we're trained in fundraising and cultivating relationships was very, very important, particularly in the way in which we as an organization raise money. And when I came into the organization, I would say about 45% of our budget was on individual and corporate donors. I had to do a lot of myth busting. A lot of folks still today think that Ad Hoc is funded by the city, and we're not. In fact, we don't really get a dime from the city. And so it was really educating a lot of folks around that point. As we began to transition and talk to those who gave annually, one of the biggest challenges that Ad Hoc, as I faced, I should say, is we had an annual fundraiser that was built around our founder. It was celebrating his birthday every year, which brought in 6 figures, which was great. And as I said, it's that made about 50%, well, about 45% of our budget through one annual fundraising event. That is something that I had always had to challenge the board around in terms of, hey, we need to do more than just one fundraiser a year. And so, but the challenge also was we had a small board and about half of them really put in the work. And so over the years, I've had to really increase our foundation giving in terms of the number of foundations we engage around violence prevention. And so today, I would say that, here we are in 2020, and it's been one heck of a year. It's been very much a controversial year for sure. But when we began in 2020, we were planning our annual fundraising event, which I mentioned was our annual event called the Community Guardian Awards, where we celebrated those who had similar visions, as well as our founder's birthday, which the event takes place in May. So March, I would say about March, we had already sent out save the dates to a lot of our corporate and individual donors. And then I would say by the end of March, we had to turn back around and notify those folks that, hey, we're not going to do the event. And just stay tuned until we figure out what's going on with this pandemic. But to also take a step back, 2019, we as an organization really began to notice this uptick in not only homicides, but also violent assaults. And so we had made an early determination that we would begin to, we were trying to figure out how do we keep violence on the minds of folks. And then, of course, as you all have seen in the news, whether it be with George Floyd or Ahmaud Arbery and some of these things that have occurred, that we as an organization had to take a step back too and say, how does Ad Hoc be a part of this narrative? How do we sleep at night knowing where we stand? We have to really be clear about where we stand at this moment in time. And so there's a lot of political things that has been occurring. There's a lot of controversial things that has been occurring as well. And a lot of that impacts giving in so many ways. So here we were coming up in May, not knowing where, we had rescheduled our annual event for the fall. we began to talk about, okay, we'll have it in person. And then by June, we were like, nope, we're not gonna have it in person. So we began to explore what would it look like to do a virtual event. And at the same time, I had to grow my board. I was down about 4 board members. I was also down about 4 counselors as well. And so this year, I've had to grow our staff in the midst of a pandemic. I've had to also grow my board in the midst of a pandemic too. So it was more around finding people who could understand what we do and where we're going, not only just for this year and how we're going to figure out how we're going to raise money, but also how do we really communicate effectively what our story is and the services and programs that we provide to folks as well. So part of what we had to do is take a step back and say, okay, we're not going to engage our typical donors because they're not a lot of them aren't impacted by this particular issues that are going on as it relates to violence. And so in March, we kicked off what we call the Epidemic of Violence virtual series. And this was our way of trying to keep this discussion around violence in people's minds. In March, we had also realized that we had lost more people to gun violence than we had the coronavirus. And so we really began to try to educate the public by having more virtual events. And I would say, even through that process, the goal was to cultivate a new donor base as well by first engaging them in what we do and this issue around violence. And so we leaned on a lot of our partners and other community organizations to be a part of this conversation as well. And about July, we said, okay, after we had done we were doing these events every 2 weeks. We had a seminar that we were doing, but we wasn't raising money at the time. It was really about cultivating that new sort of donor base and helping people understand what we do and how we do it. So in July, we made the determination that we were going to have our first fundraiser be virtual. And so we scheduled it for this month, October 20th. By the way, you can go on our website at hocgroupkc.com and you can register today. And you can also give while you're doing that too. So we're really exploring our first virtual event. And it's also, I think the challenge that I put to the board was, can we raise money outside of our annual event? Can we, cultivate a new donor base outside of our annual, fundraising event? And so we're hoping to answer that question very soon. Actually, in 7 days, we'll be able to answer that question. The other thing I will share is, I'm looking at my notes here. One of the things that we decided to do and this is really my decision around trying to find a new donor base and not go to some of our typical folks that sponsor our annual Guardian Awards. I really wanted to see if we could raise money in a different way. And so, this year our online giving has increased tremendously. We have folks that have become monthly donors. And I think a lot of that has to do with our ability with a lot of these webinars that we've been doing every month. I think we've brought on, and this may seem small to some of you, but I think we've been averaging about 5 to 10 new donors a month. And this is strictly through online giving, which is amazing for us because we've never done it before. I think we did in the last 5 years, we were doing the annual at the end of the year that, the annual, ask in November before people have to, file their taxes or buy their, Christmas gifts, those sorts of things. We were doing that. And I think we were raising somewhere between $1,300 to $2,500 at the end of the year, and that was the gist of our online giving. And so we've been averaging about that much a month now, just through online giving. And so that's been really great. And I think that a lot of it has to do with our ability to sort of stay relevant to these times, and communicating to people and standing up for something as well. And even though to some of our corporate folks that they give, it could be very controversial or political when you think about, movements like the Black Lives Matter movement and things like that. But we've had to sort of draw a line to say, hey, when we look back at this year, given what we've seen in the current protests that are going on right now with Tent City and everything else, we wanted to be proud of where we stood, and we wanted to challenge those who stand with us and who support us as well. And we knew that some of our corporate folks wouldn't do that, and we didn't bother to ask either, which I think we'll learn from that too, whether that was a calculated mistake or not. But I think as we move into 2021 and what we're planning to do virtually, we're going to go back and engage those folks and give them the opportunity to give. But first and foremost, it begins with our ability to tell that story. And I know I'm almost at time here because I see Tim leaning in. Let me just say. Actually, no, I think I've covered all my points.
That's great.
Thanks.
That's great, Damon. And just a quick story. When Damon and I were chatting a month or so ago and just catching up about his organization, what was so compelling to me was here is an organization that has relied on constituent support of its founder for so many years, over a third of its budget being funded by this annual event that in part celebrated the founder's birthday. And Damon, in a sense, taking advantage of the crisis of 2020, from the corona pandemic to racial unrest and gun violence in Kansas City, to parlay that into a series of events, the epidemic of violence, to talk about issues that are so central to his organization and how to elevate those in a way that educates, advances his mission, and raises money. Here in about 7 days, as Damon mentioned, he's bringing in 2 national speakers to talk about the epidemic of violence and why we've arrived at this point. So it's just really exciting stuff. Listen, we have about 10 more minutes. I'd love to turn it over to maybe Cindy and Monica to give voice to any of the questions that came in throughout our session so far. Cindy, Monica?
Yeah, I haven't got questions yet, so but do put them in there. We're watching the chat room and stuff, or just raise your hand or go ahead and unmute if you want to just ask your own question. That's fine too. Just a comment from somebody though, and I don't know if anybody wants to comment on it, but using disruption to birth innovation is just a really exciting thing,
Mm-hmm.
One thing I noticed that I just made a note of, and I don't know if you want to comment further on it, but I heard it from at least 2 of you, maybe 3, is how important it is to just keep people informed. And you just kind of casually, just keeping people informed. And I'm trying to think, like, what did I write down? The message, staying relevant to what was going on, and just being that the voice or the insight, the window into what was really happening, either in the community or with your clients or something like that. And I think that's something that all 3 of you stated.
I heard that a lot as well. In planning this event, Tom in particular was giving me a lot of trouble. Like, I'm not sure what you're talking about with this fundraising cycle. And Damon said the same thing to me. I'm not sure about this fundraising cycle. We just need to change how we communicate. We're not dramatically changing how we're fundraising. We're still using the same basic relationship building tools. We're just changing our message. Tom, Becky, Damon, any?
Like I say, I keep going back to trying to find the shared experience. So I think another thing, would bet most of us on this either have someone in our family or know someone who lost their job or had their hours cut due to COVID. And what may distinguish our family member or our friend is that they have a built-in support system where folks that come to Bishop Sullivan Center do not. I think one woman wrote on her application, "I have no family support." So there's the shared experience. People understand what it's like to lose a job. They've had a family member, but now here's what separates. Here's people that they don't have family. They can't go back home and move in. They're on their own, and they need the help of others. So I'm constantly looking for that shared experience between those who have resources and those who don't.
Tim,
And
I've got a question. Oh, go ahead.
No, go ahead.
I've got a question about how do you suggestions on that tone that you use. How do you be honest but not cause a panic? How do you balance that?
Because there were so many unknowns, the panic appeal was legitimate and it was honest. I didn't know it was coming, but now I think there is somewhat of a settling. So it's as I've said to Tim, I think the content has changed a little bit, just reflecting what we are seeing, and then and hopefully that the donor resonates with that message and respond.
Any thoughts on your end?
I wanted to make an observation about the interconnectedness of each of the three of us who said yes to Tim this morning. When we did our welfare check calls in early April and found out the level of hardship in our parent community, who did we turn to? We turned to Tom Turner, and we said, if we do a little bit of pre-screening, can our families be served at Bishop Sullivan Center? He wasn't looking at a budget. He wasn't looking at an appeal response. He said, absolutely, here's what I want you to do. So he made a connectedness with us and an unintentional partnership that stabilized and did so much good for our families. So hats off to the hardworking staff at Bishop Sullivan Center. On the other front, I think that we all felt the knot in our throat and our hearts stop when we saw that video of what happened to George Floyd. And people rushed to write statements of support, to gather people for conversation. But Damon, I can't tell you the feeling of pride that I felt on the third night of the local action when I saw two of our young alumni, and I'm not going to identify them by last name, but Roman and Marvelous, taking a knee in the park with the mayor and with the chief of police. These are young people who should give us all great hope. They were out there in a peaceful action, but they were dialoguing with community leaders about what was on their mind. They're both young college students now. We are all connected. Every one of us somehow brings something to the mosaic in this community. Look around this Zoom room, look around the next networking function, the very people you need in that next crisis where speed is of the essence could be on this call. And just tell yourself that we're all in this together. We're going to stabilize this community, and we're going to take that big step forward and continue to do the great work that we're doing. It's so very important. Our students, who are just a tiny piece of this community's mosaic, they need you. They are on the margin. They need to see an intentional investment in heart and soul in some form of hope for their future. And only we as adults can be a part of that process. We have to do it.
Thanks, Becky. Last question, Monica or Cynthia, would you give voice to that on Giving Tuesday?
Yeah, so just all of your thoughts, something that's coming up in about a month, I guess, is Giving Tuesday. And have any of you given some thought to that? The question is that they plan to do something, a direct mail campaign, an email campaign around it. What are you planning to do, or what have you thought about around Giving Tuesday for this year?
I've never paid attention to it, to be honest. We send something out almost once a month, and that seems to work. So I may work for some organizations. Maybe I should. I just haven't paid attention to it.
Yeah, that was what I was referencing before. We did our Giving Tuesday, but didn't raise a whole lot of money during that time, and we probably won't this year either. In fact, we're planning a follow-up event from our October 20th event in November, and so we're hoping that we can, galvanize folks to give during that time.
Cristo Rey will add to the mix, but it is not a pillar of our giving. It's more an awareness campaign. You have to know where your donors are. Damon has talked about the growth in his online givers. Tom probably could tell you who his people are, or at least give numbers. The reality is, if you have an older donor base, they're making a budget of what they're going to give charitably at the end of the year. You want to be on that list. We will add to the story of what we're doing 365 days a year to raise money, but Giving Tuesday, we don't have a major partner. We don't have a Quick Trip or some large retailer that's dropping money into our Giving Tuesday bucket. So we'll be a part of it, but we're not counting on it to change the equation for Cristo Rey at the end of the year.
Great. One last question, and then we'll finish up. It's from Colette Black. She's just asking, how do you deal with the slump and the fatigue that comes from the slump of fundraising? Becky, I think that was part of your slide deck. She said, they've been raising money like mad, running, trying to do everything they can to generate support for their organization. And there's just some fatigue, both on the staff side and maybe on the donor side. Any insights from the three of you as kind of concluding thoughts of how fundraisers and organizations stick with it? I think
this would apply to anything, but maybe this speaks to it, is try to keep the message interesting. I have a former co-worker of mine who's now retired, who I still talk to quite a bit about fundraising. And this is in no reference to Tim Sweeny, but he often says to me, don't just tell another poor Timmy story to your donors. They've heard poor Timmy stories. So I think another challenge is how to write a story that there's something in it for the reader. So it's just not, okay, I've heard this story. One quick example, I met a woman a few weeks ago. She was a school bus driver, and so she's not getting the hours that she was anticipating. So she fell behind. She's taking care of two adult handicapped children. And I was just, and one of them was in a car wreck the night before. And I said, my God, how do you keep going? And her quick, teary-eyed answer was, my children keep me going. And so I shared that story with my donors, and I said, I read a line by Nietzsche once that said, if you can find your why, you can endure any how. And I said, this woman found her why. It was her children. And that's how she can endure. How do I manage this? And I said to the donor, if you're having a tough time, find your why, and you'll make it through. So now took her story and made there something in it, a bit of her wisdom for the reader. So I think that's how you keep it fresh, instead of, here's another story of someone affected by COVID. How does it connect to the reader or the listener?
Tom, I think on that philosophical note, we should bring our session to an end. That's some great insight. Hey, thanks to both to Becky and Damon and Tom for their insights. Thanks to UMKC and the Midwest Center for their work.